I will now call this meeting to order. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
Make a motion to adopt the final agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Laura. All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, the motion carries. Our next order of business is to adopt the minutes from the February 1st, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Greg. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Greg. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. We are now moving on to our discussion item. Our first discussion item on our agenda tonight is item 3.1, review of sketch plan for proposed Simon property development through Loomis. We'll now call this meeting to order. Our first This item is for discussion and feedback purposes only. I will now turn it over to Community and Economic Development Director Marty Dole for staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, before you this evening is a sketch plat review of the Simon property that has been submitted by Loomis Development LLC. As a reminder, no approvals or actions are taken during sketch plat meetings. They're really an opportunity just to provide guidance to assist the applicant in any subsequent preliminary plat application. Property owners within 350 feet of the subject property were notified and invited to participate in this meeting. I've actually got the slide and the verbiage right this time, in this meeting, due to the limited number of properties that are within. So at the commission's pleasure, when we conclude, if you'd like to provide an opportunity for anybody in the audience who'd wish to ask any questions related to the development. So this property is located at 5460 Marsh Lake Road. It is south and east of the Laketown developments. It is west of property owned by the Schmieg Farm and north of Marsh Lake Road. The property is approximately 8 acres with approximately 6.1 of those developable. It is currently used primarily for agricultural. There is some trees and some existing buildings that would be anticipated to be removed, as well as some wetland that encompasses this property. As with all developments, a tree survey would be required as the project moves forward, and this is located in the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District area, so must adhere to their rules. The property is guided for low-density residential, which is 2.25 to 6.0 units per acre. 16 lots are currently being proposed on this parcel, which yields approximately 2.6 net units per acre. The property is currently zoned ag, agricultural, and would require rezoning, currently proposed for PUD with R1 underlying zoning. As was included in your background packet, there were some concept drawings and layouts, and we can come back to these slides as part of the discussion. As currently proposed, the zoning and lot regulations for this development would include a minimum lot area of 9,500 square feet, minimum lot width of 70 feet, minimum lot depth of 130 feet, side yard setbacks of 8 feet each side, front yard setback of 20, rear yard setback of 30, a rear yard from Marsh Lake Road setback of 50 feet, and a corner setback of 20 feet. For comparison, the adjacent Laketown 16th edition approved regulations are included and were included in your background packet. Setbacks are similar, and the lot sizes are being proposed to be slightly larger than Laketown 16th edition. So as was noted in your background, staff does intend to continue discussions with the applicant to determine if front and or side yard setbacks can be increased if that is at all feasible. And as I noted previously, the property is proposed to be rezoned from ag to PUD. As you'll recall from the Laketown 16th development, there is a requirement for a 40-foot landscape buffer and a berm along Marsh Lake Road. The applicants are aware of that requirement and are working to try to include that within their proposal. There is no park identified in this location in the comprehensive plan, so the applicant would be requested to satisfy park dedication with park dedication fee. For transportation and right-of-way, currently proposed is an extension of Catkin Way in the city standard 60-foot right-of-way, and also additional right-of-way dedication for a future expansion and realignment of Marsh Lake Road. Staff are supportive of both of those transportation items from a concept level. The current proposal shows a potential connection to Timber Terrace, which would be anticipated to extend to Marsh Lake Road from where it stubs to the north from the Laketown development. The applicant has indicated that their intention would be to cul-de-sac Catkin Way if the city does not construct that extension of Timber Terrace. Some of the conversation that the city and the applicant have had is that a cul-de-sac there does result in more than 40 lots on a single access, which fire code would, as you know, require a second access. So we continue to work with them, or plan to continue to work with them to determine the best solution to make that connection to Timber Terrace, Catkin Way, and Marsh Lake Road versus creating a cul-de-sac situation. That connection is going to be a lot of moving parts. It's one of the reasons I asked Kara if she could attend tonight, just in case you have some questions related to that. It'll require some stormwater management, easements, those types of things. As proposed currently, there is no trail within the property, but 6-foot concrete sidewalks are being proposed on one side of all of the local streets per city standards. Utilities and stormwater, the parcel would be served with utilities by connection to the adjacent development, so those utilities are there and available to be brought in. As I mentioned, the property is within the MCWD and would be subject to their rules. They have provided some initial feedback that was included in your packet. As always, stormwater features, wetlands, and wetland buffers are to be deeded to the city. Access needs to be provided to all stormwater ponds in accordance to standards. And then, as I alluded to earlier, further discussion and coordination is going to be needed related to potential stormwater impacts created by the Timber Terrace extension. So with that, as I noted, Chair and Commissioners, this is considered a neighborhood meeting, so we would recommend that the Planning Commission consider any questions or comments from those in attendance. And then just some of the other items we noted from our review at this concept phase is that we should continue discussions on possible increase of front and side yard setbacks. Cross sections will likely be needed in later applications for the proposed berm and planting along Marsh Lake Road. And then that those buffer and screening requirements be adhered to. Continuing discussions related to the connection of Timber Terrace, finalizing utility plans and stormwater plans, and then providing all necessary wetland delineation reports, maintenance access for stormwater ponds, a tree survey, etc. So with that, Chair, I will turn it over to you if you'd like to see if there's anyone in the audience that would like to ask any questions. We also do have representatives from the development team as well if you have questions for them.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much, Marty. Is there anyone from the development organization that would like to take the podium first?
Good evening, Scott Loomis with Loomis Development. Thanks, Marty, great presentation. Basically, we're just the conversations that we're trying to hash out here is the berm. We're having a hard time reaching the 8-foot berm height back there on the Marsh Lake Road. And a lot of that is we need to get our stormwater to drain properly in those backyards. To make that 8 feet, just because how the elevation of the road and everything goes, is gonna be pretty hard to achieve with, you know, to have a decent backyard to these houses. Otherwise, you know, we're gonna have houses with, you know, 15 feet, and then there's gonna be a wall, and then it's just gonna bank up. Currently, we have it on our grading plan about six feet throughout the berm there. And then too, with the timber terrace, it's hard with such a small development, you know, to fork over to continue that, you know, because we're going to continue discussions with city staff here and see if we can get that resolved. It's just, you know, if we were proposing, you know, 40, 50 lots, you know, that's a lot more feasible financially, and, you know, the cost of construction and pipe, as you guys probably know, at city projects has been going, you know, through the roof lately, so. Yep. Any further questions you guys have, or?
Not at this time.
I didn't know there was an issue.
Go
I was gonna say, I didn't know there was an issue with trying to reach the 8-foot berm and the cutting through, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on the topic or has any questions? Commissioners, any questions on this?
I just have a quick question about the front yard setback that's proposed of, why are we looking to narrow it to 20 feet? And then in terms of sidewalk in Laketown addition, is there a sidewalk on both sides of the street, or is it on one side of the street? There, is it connect, so that there's continuity with that section?
Yeah, Commissioner Vansky, I'll take your second question first. The sidewalk in Laketown is only on one side of the streets. That is the standard for the city to have sidewalk on one side of public streets. Although, as you know, in certain situations, we do request sidewalk on both sides. But in Laketown, it is on one side of city streets. The setback, that was one of the things staff noted, is that those front yard setbacks do get small to try and make sure you have enough room on driveways to park vehicles. So that, in addition to the side yard setbacks, are one of the items that we'd like to continue to talk with the applicant about. I defer to the applicant if they have any other specific rationale as to why they're asking for the 20 feet versus something greater.
In regards to the setbacks, to the lots that back up to Marsh Lake, that's really kind of hard to achieve with the berm. We're trying to, you know, get to 6 feet, you know, is really tough, you know, but the other lots are, you know, some of them we can make 30 feet work. It's just, you know, even in the Lennar phase over there, I see they were proposing 20 to 25 foot setbacks. We're pretty consistent. We're proposing a 70-foot wide lots versus 65 what they did, so we're pretty consistent in what they have over there.
Other question, Commissioners?
Well, Timber Terrace doesn't end in a cul-de-sac today, so what was the thought when that was put in? Because it just ends?
Yeah, Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, a cul-de-sac is not required unless there is necessity for fire turnaround in that area. That's what the hammerhead or the cul-de-sacs are required. And that is only if the street extension is greater than 150 feet, is that right? So that stub that's coming down from Timber Terrace is less than that 150 feet.
So how does the city snowplow turn around?
I'm not sure, do you know?
Because my development has a private road because the city won't plow it. Because they can't turn around.
Perfect.
So I'm curious how that works here.
Yeah, so, and we can't quite see the intersection there. There is an intersection just off the page to the north there that essentially they aren't gonna necessarily plow with their big plow. 150 feet is the break point that the city put in place for when they would allow a short stub street without a cul-de-sac at the end. Timber Terrace has been planned with the Laketown development to be extended to Marsh Lake Road. It is in the city's capital improvement plan to complete that connection in 2022. It's 2022 this year, right? Yeah.
It's this year.
It's like, I said that right? The kind of the question we're grappling with right now is, does the city proceed with making that connection in front of development or in concurrently with development probably would be the better approach for how to do that. So that's why you're seeing it show up the way that it is on the plan. The city council had previously authorized preliminary design for that road, so that's the same corridor where the utilities were extended to serve the south growth area. So the sewer and water are already in the ground along that corridor. But we didn't, when we acquired easements for the sewer and water, we didn't acquire the right-of-way at that time for the roadway connection, because that, sets up some different issues to work through with the landowners who are impacted by that roadway connection. So it's complicated.
So, and there is some concerns on the economics of putting that road in at the same time?
Correct.
How will that work?
So the developer is indicating that they wouldn't want to be asked to fund 100% of the cost of making that connection. The city does have money planned in the capital improvement plan and budgeted for making the connection. So if their development moves forward, we would anticipate that staff and the underlying landowners, the Simons, the Schmiegs, and the developer would all be working through that process together as it moves to preliminary plat.
Would the city get reimbursed for any of that for future developments? Or
So
for
the city
developers?
council would need to make that decision. The city can't collect a fee per se unless it was agreed to by the adjacent property owners. The tool that the city would have at its disposal would be to specially assess the adjacent property owners for the roadway improvements, and that would be a council decision whether they wanted to pursue that. But we've been planning it as a city expense for making the connection, and part of the reason for that is the Laketown development is pretty big and has a lot of homes, but the access points into the development were limited by what the county would allow on County Road 11 and what we would want on Marsh Lake Road from a long-term perspective. When Laketown 16th came in and was approved, we contemplated a connection from the 16th to Marsh Lake Road. And some of you might recall that there were some pretty big grade challenges there that made that connection infeasible. So at that time, the city decided that this Timber Terrace connection and then Red Fox, so the property to the west of here, the Kelzer property, there'll be another roadway connection there. So the city council is getting a lot of feedback from the Laketown residents to see another connection made in this area, because you only have Hackmore and Bridle that's receiving a lot of traffic today. So I think I answered your question.
Any other questions for Tara while she's there? Thank you very much.
What's the feasibility of this Timber Creek getting put in? I mean, are the landowners going with this, or?
We've had I don't want to speak for them because they're both here, but we've been having conversations with both the underlying landowners for a long time. So they're well aware of it. Of course, the devil's in the details. We haven't proposed a deal for purchasing the right-of-way yet, because we need to finish the design.
I guess my biggest concern is just the whole, I know it's in the budget, and, developers have built all the streets throughout the developments, and why is the city getting involved with continuing to build streets?
I think the situation that's causing this particular connection to perhaps be viewed a little bit differently by the city council is that for sure we have one landowner in the area who isn't intending to sell for development anytime soon. So the council's trying to balance that safety aspect of getting another connection into the neighborhood. The city is limited because we don't have the ability to charge a connection fee where we collect money from developers to pay for roadway connections like this. The legislature hasn't given the city the authority to do that. Where with sewer and water, we collect fees from the developers to pay for those infrastructure extensions. We don't have the authority to do that here. Our only tool is special assessments, which are really not all that great in these types of circumstances. So You know, it certainly is a council decision for how to proceed with that. The council could decide, no, we're not going to invest in that. We're going to wait for the Schmieg property to develop. I think in that scenario, the city staff would be, instead of the temporary cul-de-sac that the developer is proposing, we would be looking to have them make a connection to Marsh Lake Road through what would be Lot 7. So within their own property, so that there was a second access, because the 16 homes from this plat and the previous Laketown 16th edition would exceed the number of houses that the fire chief likes to see. The fire code says should be on a single access point.
Commissioner Kuhn, chair, members of the commission, just another note on that. One of the other things that makes this a bit unique is that that connection is in a little bit of a no man's land right now. So the current timber terrace does not stub all the way to the property line of this development property, I believe, because of some of those complexities with design and multiple property owners and where we felt like it needed to go.
And the shape, it's like a point.
Right. So that creates another level of complexity that it, when we typically see developments will pick up the roadway from their property, we've got a length of roadway here that is on city outlot, would be put on city outlot, that doesn't stub to the property.
Okay, so Timber Terrace to the north does not stub to this property, correct?
It does not.
And does it stub to the Schmieg property to the east?
Yes.
Kara, the actual pavement ends somewhere
It's south of there. You can kind of see it a little further, right
down
there.
here.
So the underlying Lennar parcel was like a triangle. It wasn't a rectangular squared off endpoint. But so to the east there is Schmieg property. On the other side of a little outlot that's still owned by the city, and then the west side is city-owned outlot.
And the property line is here.
I won't go far.
Again, this is it's a very, very open and flowing discussion. Is there any comments from the landowners that will be impacted by this?
We've been in communication with Marty and Kara, and so that's kind of how things are evolving, and they're keeping us kind of up to speed, and so so that's been good.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay, so the current plan is for you to grant an easement to have this Timber Terrace connect if we get there, correct? Not deed a parcel of your property over to the city for the road?
Step up to the mic.
Yeah, we just haven't quite got to that point yet.
Okay.
It would be right-of-way acquisition that the city would be acquiring, so we'd be purchasing land from them.
Okay, so and I mean, just last meeting, we were talking about another subdivision where there's actually an easement that needs to be given by the property owner to the city to put the road in. Are we getting ourselves into that, or are we looking more as we're gonna work on a way that the Schmiegs deed a segment of their property so that becomes the city property for the road, correct?
Yeah, we would be purchasing right-of-way for this situation.
And Commissioner Vansky, chair, members of the commission, what you're referring to is the Marsh Hollow Creekside Lane extension, and the reason that's a little bit different is because they're only platting right of way currently on the Marsh Hollow side of that development, but want to build property owner has agreed to build the road on the property line. So until that northern property develops, which at that point then that right of way would be platted as well, they need to have easement access granted to be able to build the roadway.
But when they develop that northern parcel, they're gonna.
It will be platted as right of way.
Platted for that. Right now, we're talking about actually platting this and then in that carving out a section of the Schmieg property and then having that platted back into the roadway, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah. And, the reality of it is that Timber Terrace connection back to the north is not necessary for this landowner, the Simons, who own the piece that Loomis is looking at to develop. We just have an opportunity to facilitate the two projects together. But, absent, the city council could decide, we're gonna wait to have that connection back up to Lake Town until the Schmieg property develops. This underlying landowner still, is able to sell for development without that extension connection being made.
Okay.
At which point, number 7 would have to become a street down to Marsh Lake Road, correct? According to Chief Hager?
Yeah, I think that would be staff's recommendation. If Timber Terrace didn't connect through, staff would be recommending a connection be made to Marsh Lake Road.
So kind of getting rid of the cul-de-sac idea altogether.
Yeah, again, I think that would end up being staff's recommendation. We'd obviously review plans in detail as they came in, but from a concept level, that would likely be staff's recommendation.
Right, thank you.
And then that would be a throwaway when the regular road is expanded at some later point?
That would be the challenge,
That
right?
would be for me to try to figure
You
out.
already have the driveway. Why don't you just use that?
Now, one of the other considerations, what is the proximity to the nearest park for this development?
Chair, members of the commission, we are likely talking up by the school, up in this area, and then also the park over here in the meadows, although that one would be a little more difficult to get to because we don't have a trail system along Marsh Lake Road. You'd have to take trail all the way through. So we'd likely be looking at the Lake Town Park here at the school. Would be the closest from this area coming up this way.
Is that viewed as acceptable?
It's within the area limitations or area guidelines from the park plan and the comp plan. It is within the distances.
Any other thoughts from the developer? Any questions that you have for the commissioners at the same time?
No further comments.
Okay, very good, very good. Anything else?
I mean, just a comment I'll make is that I don't necessarily have issue with the side yard setbacks. I know that we're looking to get things back to, a more generous size setbacks because of obviously once we start narrowing that, then we minimize the amount that people can put on their properties, and then the next thing we're having snowmobile trailers, we're having boat trailers parked on the street as opposed to being parked on the landowner's private property. And then these are consistent setbacks with the existing developments are there, so we keep the continuity of the neighborhood. What I probably have the greatest issue with at this point is the number of homes that would be served if a cul-de-sac was just permitted it's a public safety issue that we probably shouldn't compromise on. So we need to come up with a solution for that.
Good point.
Why wouldn't you just build the timber terrace just up to the point where the road ends and not all the way up? At least then you're not rebuilding the other part later.
That would be an option as well, but does still require right-of-way acquisition from the Schmiegs to be on the planned alignment. So,
Right, but you wouldn't-
but that's an option too. That would all be explored as part of how we move
You don't have to
forward.
redo anything later,
Correct.
and you don't lose lot number 7.
Yep,
And it's it looks to be a smaller piece.
definitely.
But there's something with stormwater, is that the whole area or just that section or?
The section between the cul-de-sac back to the existing timber terrace has some, just some stormwater management challenges that we have to work through. Water flows from east to west through that area, so we don't want the road to become a dam that would become a problem for the Schmeek property. So we need to work through
From the
that.
cul-de-sac down to Marsh Lake Road, how about that?
That's not problematic. There's some poor soils in the area, which adds another layer of complexity that we didn't include in the staff report, but.
Very good.
I just have one last question for you, Kara, if you don't mind. This northern extension that, that feels like it was reserved for potential future use, potential future development. What's the prospect of just abandoning that piece altogether and then sort of redeploying resources to fix this potential problem that could arise by doing this development? Or are we better served with the city's use of resources by continuing on with that expansion?
So there was a lot of analysis done on access points for the Laketown development, which, was born back in 2003. So we've been working on this track for quite some time. The alternative route really would be Red Fox, would be our next connection point to the west. So Red Fox, which is a collector, is planned to come through the Kelzer property, and then it will continue down through the South Growth area at some point in time. But there's some challenges with that extension as well. It's a little bit more complicated. It's longer. It's not a straight shot. There's a wetland that potentially would be impacted. So this one was deemed to be if the city were to take the lead on doing one, this is the most cost effective. And because we already needed to get utilities through that area, it became an area that the council was interested in seeing move forward. But when you look at the number of homes that have gone in for the Laketown development to the north there, the city's getting a lot of feedback from the residents around the intersection of Bridle and Hackmore, because right now, all of those cars are coming up through that intersection, so there's concerns about safety and speed. So we've been looking at different traffic calming things that could be done in that intersection. So having a secondary access would relieve some of the pressure off that intersection that's happening with all the development that's been approved to date.
Thank you.
I've got one for you. Properties to the northwest, are they 8-foot bermed on Marsh Lake Road? And does the property that we're discussing, are there circumstances that do make it more difficult, or is it yes?
So Lennar had a very difficult time getting a berm in that location. At one point, the Planning Commission recommended denial, and staff was able to work through it with them. They're at an advantage because they've seen their grading plan. They haven't submitted for preliminary plat yet. That's the point where we'll see their grading plan. So I can't answer that from a technical perspective until I have an opportunity to see what their proposed grades are. But what they were describing was some of the challenge that Lennar had. The lots to the northwest, they don't have a very big backyard. I don't remember what it ended up being, but they had drawn some typical section for the Planning Commission and City Council to kind of weigh in that give-take between having the taller berm and not having much of a usable backyard. That becomes your trade-off. That's the challenge in this area. Everything's much lower as you go to the northwest than what the road is at. So it's hard to go up 8 feet as you're fighting grade down.
Commissioner Pedersen, chair, members of the commission, the berm that Lennar was eventually approved for was not 8 feet, was not an average of 8 feet. I don't recall what the average height ended up being, but I think it was looked more towards the screening of the roof up to the roof line of the house and whatever height that needed to be to screen to the roof line of the house. But it was not an 8-foot berm that was eventually approved there either. It was shorter than that.
Okay, I would just think if it could be consistent with what is north, it should be, in my opinion, in my single opinion, acceptable, as long as it's consistent. And that brings me to my next question. Just from what you had shown on the presentation, these lots are all 20% bigger, generally speaking, than the lots to the northwest. Are the homes going to be 20% bigger? Are we not to that stage yet? Is it going to be consistent with the neighborhood? Or are we going to have totally different style of homes in this particular spot?
Yeah, Commissioner Pedersen, we did receive some architectural. I did not include it in the background packet, but certainly I think the applicant could speak to some of their plans of what they'd envision seeing there.
We'd be consistent with Lennar's 2 stories and square footage wise and everything, so
Okay,
it'd blend through the neighborhood.
well, thank you.
Yep.
Any other concerns? Julie? Okay. Anything else? Well, I mean, we're certainly here to make things happen, you know, certainly within the confines of what we have to work with, and we have to make sure that we're friendly neighbors at the same time, and I think we've done a good job on making sure that we're working with everyone at the same time too. Did you have anything else, Greg, that you wanted to?
No, Chair Iverson, I think I have everything addressed. We'll just,
Very good. Hearing no other discussion, I'll close this item.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Our second item is also for discussion and feedback purposes. This is item 3.2, residential zoning districts, code language, and bulk regulation. I will again turn this over to Community and Economic Development Director Marty Dole for staff presentation. Marty?
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. Yes, we are continuing our discussion on our residential zoning districts. As you'll recall, we've held several meetings already thus far just to start talking through some things, getting some feedback, some guidance. And tonight's meeting is really going to focus on definitions, some of the code language, potential changes based on direction we talked about at our last meeting, and potentially getting into starting some of the bulk regulation discussion as well. We're going to do this a little bit different. The PowerPoint itself is pretty short. I'm going to use the PowerPoint just to give you kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about, and then I think we're going to just pull up the ordinance and scroll through and have some conversation about that. So tonight we'll be talking about some of the definitions, including accessory dwelling units, both attached, detached, residential daycare, some amendments to two-family dwelling and townhome dwelling, home occupations and floor area. We also have some revised or some new sections included to some proposed language to govern accessory dwelling units, including minimum design, setback, and bulk standards. And then similar to home occupations, which, as we've talked about extensively, is not defined within our current code. And then in addition to that, I won't go over each of these items bullet by bullet because they were included in your background, and we'll go through them as we talk about the ordinance, but several items within the residential zoning district. And so with that, I think I'm going to actually kick it over to Isaac to start us off to talk about the definitions and then the ADU and home occupation sections.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, members of the commission. As you all know, our definition section is kind of our bread and butter when it comes to the zoning code. So we spent some time looking at some of the code language we have and the references that we have to better address what we're seeing day to day with land use requirements. One of those being accessory dwelling units, which have become more popular. Looking at our current code, something that we've struggled with in recent years is that we have some duplicative code language. That being the definition of accessory apartment and accessory dwelling unit. If you look at both definitions, they're basically the same thing, although accessory apartment isn't referenced anywhere else within our code. So starting from scratch to address those accessory dwelling units or secondary dwellings within a house or detached from a house, staff did some market city comparison and looked at some of what our neighbors are doing throughout the metro to kind of better address that. So those two red lines are denoting striking the accessory apartment and accessory dwelling unit existing code language. And then moving down, based on and demand that's occurring with these ADUs, many cities and in most cases, ADUs or accessory dwelling units are two distinctly different things. One being an accessory dwelling unit that's attached to a house, and that could exist in a basement with many home models that are being constructed, or a side-by-side or something above a garage that's kind of like your classic in-law suite that folks pursue for multi-generational living, and then a detached ADU. So these two first green-lined definitions attempt to kind of put the delineation between accessory dwelling units that are attached and something that's detached or a completely different structure. Moving down, there's the addition of kind of piggybacking on our previous discussion on home occupations rather. One of the items that was discussed was kind of the distinction between different daycare settings. In town, we do know of a few in-house daycare units. So this definition attempts to refer to those smaller operations that exist within a residence for up to 10 minors under the care of someone day to day. Currently, we don't have a distinction between what is a daycare facility and what is kind of some of the smaller operations that could exist. So this definition is kind of putting a distinction between the two and fleshes up with the state's guidelines for daycare regulations.
10 minor children, is that the number of children, or is that 10 minor children per care attendant?
So it would be, in this situation, it would be 10 minor children per residence or house, basically.
Structure.
Slightly different than the state's requirements. Of course, someone running a daycare operation would have to follow the state guidelines. There's a couple more.
That's why I'm wondering, like, if the state says 12 and then somebody has 12, do they not fall into this, but they aren't a business daycare, they are in their residence? Do we want to align with the state statutes so that they, or maybe we need to look at what they are. I don't know what they are. I'm just, I think that they sometimes have more than 10.
Right.
Is my point.
From what I've looked at, there's a couple of breaks. So we're looking at it
16
with this code where it's like 0 or 1 to 10, and then there's a few more breaks in between that, and then the state's licensure for a facility. It's certainly within the purview of the commission and council to kind of break that up further if you wanted to say, this is kind of a home occupation, it's less intensive, or at what point, how many children do we reach where it becomes more intensive and requires more permitting requirements. I think what this is attempting to do is get it under the umbrella of an acceptable home occupation rather than a more intensive business.
We're trying to protect the neighborhood, the neighbors from
Traffic?
large numbers of kids hanging out next door throughout the day.
I think they would have to have enclosed play space anyway because of the daycare regulations. So usually if they have a home daycare, they would have a fenced yard.
And
And they would have to play in that space.
Yeah, you see a fenced yard, but it's the difference of having 10 kids running around versus having 20 kids running around all day long.
But you can have 20 kids if you want to.
Pardon?
If I wanted to have 20 kids of my own, I could. I mean, I couldn't, but I could. I don't want to, but I'm just saying you can't, I think that that's hard to manage with the fact that they could be all living there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Commissioner Shorting, Chair, members of the commission. I think part of the dynamic here is, although, and I can't speak for Marty, I personally haven't received any complaints about home run daycares, but we do know that they exist. Part of the logic behind the madness here is we do know that this occurs within the city and we want to be able to address that it can exist. You know, sometimes folks do stuff creative and doesn't raise any feathers, but it's not addressed within our code, so that could be perceived as illegal. So that's kind of putting a name to a face for what people use their land for.
The other thing that it just says 10 minor children, but sometimes what they do is they'll have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday kid and a Tuesday, Thursday kid. And so then does that become 20 kids or is it 10 in any current time period? So I think you want to think through how does that language work, regardless of which direction you go, because I know that happens when people have flex schedules or they just go on Friday or they, you know.
Sure. Commissioner Murray, great point. Perhaps we could add a reference to per day.
Yeah. My kids went to a home daycare in Victoria, so I'm probably have a little bit more.
All 20 of them?
Mama had to work if I had 20 kids. All 2 of them.
Any other discussion on that or questions?
Does private home mean just a dwelling unit, or are we looking to sort of in the property use define what types of properties will have this? I mean, private home essentially could mean a townhouse, twin home, row house. Do we think that that should be something that is accommodated more in a single family dwelling unit?
There are square footage regulations for the state code, so I think that you'd have to have the square footage per child in addition to the exterior space per child for the code. So it might be good to look and see what those numbers are, because that may say, you know, that might help narrow that. I don't know.
Might narrow the field.
Yeah, what could work?
Yeah, and Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, as it's defined currently, and again, that's why we're having this discussion, is to kind of flesh out whether or not the definitions are right or need some revision. But as it is currently written, it would be a home occupation, which, as we currently have written, as you'll see as we continue on this review session, would be a permitted accessory use in every zoning district. So as written, it could be allowed anywhere. But it sounds like we need to do a little more digging on the state side of things. It sounds like that may be the limiting factor, is the size and outdoor space. So
The only other thing I noticed is we refer to it as daycare residential, and then further in the second sentence, residential daycare, which could make people think you're talking about 2 different things. That might align the language,
Sure.
just because it gets rid of the question.
We can certainly fix that. And
Do they have to be children? Can they be adults?
That's a really good question, because adult daycare is going to come with the limiting of senior properties and the baby boomers. So I think we do need to, adult daycare could definitely be a use or a home occupation as well.
if the commission is in favor, we can certainly scramble up together some similar code language to address that land use. And then additionally, do some further digging to make sure we're hitting that minimum square footage requirement for whatever dwelling unit it would occur in, so it lines up with the state regulations.
Yeah, those are real issues. Yeah, it's good.
Well, do we have to list them all, or do we say per state regulations? I mean, if the state changes their regulations, then we'd have to come back and redo all of this. Can we not just point to that?
Yeah, Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, I think that would be our intent, is we don't want to, at least as much as possible, we don't want to duplicate language from the state statute in the code. We just want to make sure we're consistent with, and it sounds like, at least the impression I'm getting, we don't want to be more restrictive necessarily than what statute allows. So that's, I think, how we want to balance it, is how we define that. And it may just be in, per definition of state statute, maybe that's the cleanest way to do it, so.
Do we have any obligation to assure that a daycare that we're aware of is licensed by the state?
I don't believe the city would have an obligation.
Commissioner Shorting, chair, members of the commission, because we're not the enforcement agency for daycares, we would not. We can certainly report that if there is a concern, but we wouldn't be able to enforce it, enforce the state's laws. If we had a definition for a residential daycare, we'd be able to enforce it under our definition and regulation on the subject. But currently we do not, so it'd be challenging if something bad were to happen. All right, well, moving on, we did make some smaller tweaks to the dwelling two-family definition, or duplex, to refer to a twin home, which we do have several instances in town, along with the townhome definition to also refer to it as a row home, which has become a more common reference for townhomes because of trendiness and all that. And then moving down, as the commission is aware and as has been discussed in the past, all references within the zoning code currently, within the existing code, refer to a definition of home occupation within the code, although there is no definition currently within the zoning code for what a home occupation is. So this green line text attempts to define what a home occupation is. And then as we move forward, we'll have some additional regulations in a separate code, but it's intended to address any occupation which is customarily in whole or in part conducted in a residence and not an accessory structure, which may be conducted in any dwelling unit, provided that all criteria of our added code language are met. To kind of close the loop on that gap for what we're currently missing within the definition section.
And Isaac, does the term home occupation, is that consistent with how other cities are labeling this? I mean, when you say home occupation means an occupation, we're talking about housing, which you occupy a house. I mean, would maybe a distinction in language such as home enterprise means any venture, venue, enterprise, et cetera, so that we kind of break the language gap between,
Sure.
This is my occupation, might be my job, but for someone who has their own business, it's not necessarily their occupation, it's their enterprise.
Sure. Commissioner Ivansky, chair, members of the commission. To my knowledge, home occupation is the most common, at least in zoning regulations, the most common reference. The beauty of these definition sections is the words mean what we say they mean. But that's a great point. I think folks could get squirrely with that, but it is in probably the 20 zoning ordinances that I looked at. It was broken up as home occupation. Some cities make distinction between different classes of home occupations based on intensity. That's not what's being shown before you tonight, but I think part of the challenge is keeping a definition broad enough that it can encompass the things that you don't necessarily see coming down the pipeline, like e-commerce probably wasn't considered as a home occupation 25 years ago, but it may be the most common form of home occupations today, but just
It may be as simple as calling home occupation means any enterprise, which is
Yeah.
primarily
We can certainly add that to kind of massage out the language to jive. And then, any other discussion on the home occupations definition? Then we'll jump to the section in a hot second here. And then moving further down, just a revision to the floor area definition for clarity and consistency for what a floor area is and not a
Actually,
minimum.
can I spend just one more minute? So
Sure.
when we're saying this term home occupation means an enterprise, that's either done whole or in part, it has to take place in the home, not necessarily, I think what you're trying to say is that, you know, if I build a little building off on my property and I'm able to meet the confines of the definitions of,
Yep.
of that building, signage, et cetera, that would not be considered a quote home occupation, correct?
If you could rephrase it, so are you saying something that occurred outside of a home?
Let's say I have
ADU.
let's say I have a 1 acre lot, and then in, you know, the far corner within the setbacks, I build a garage, a wood shop, and then I now manufacture furniture in that structure for profit.
Sure.
That would not be, that activity would not be considered a home occupation, correct?
Based on this definition, it would not be considered a home occupation because it's not occurring in an accessory structure. It would be a land use that's not addressed by code, therefore it is not permitted. If that makes any sense.
Well, it makes sense, it's just now adds another confusing.
Yeah, yep, yeah. I think we're trying to loop the definition, and we can certainly clean this up to make it, I think it's a valid point to address, you know, that home occupations should not occur outside of a home or in a garage, but.
Yeah, Isaac, that was gonna be my question, just for clarification. If the intent is that we don't want it to take place in an accessory structure, if that's the intent of the definition, then I think we need to massage that a little more, because you're right, that does provide some confusion as to, does that mean if it's in an accessory structure, it's not a home occupation and therefore I can do it? That's where you get the.
That's kind of the direction I'm going, you know, and that just brings on all kinds of other potentially issues. In my woodworking example, you know, I start spraying a bunch of lacquer, and then the kids at the daycare next door are high half the day.
I think it happens so today in homes in Victoria. So
Well, I'm sure there's
that have,
stuff happening.
I mean, there's, yeah, I was just thinking about like contractors that have an accessory dwelling that do have some of their building for like decks in their garages and then bring them out. That stuff happens now.
Yeah, if the commission, I guess my question for staff would be, does the commission wish to see that as a possibility within accessory structures? Just to provide us some direction for how to address it. It does occur, so we can see how that would be kind of something that's desired, though.
Is this something that, like, it occurs in areas where there's not a homeowners association that prohibits it, but in most suburban neighborhoods that are larger neighborhoods, there is a homeowners association that would then say, these are our rules for this homeowners association, where you cannot have an ADU, so to speak, regardless of what the city says. So that's what I'm kind of thinking, like where I think of this happening, it's a 4-acre parcel, kind of more within the city limits, but has the space to have it. So would we limit them? Because if we wrote no ADU, then that would limit them, correct?
For an ADU.
Yeah, like, because if we said it couldn't be in an ADU to be a home occupation, then they couldn't do it. Isn't that what we're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that an ADU would still be a residence if it was detached.
Yeah, I mean detached, like a
If it was
5-car
like
garage.
in a garage, yeah, potentially it could be limited, but if the commission wants to see that something that could be permitted or worked into the definition, we can certainly do that.
I think that the term, like when you, this is nitpicky, but if you go, home occupation means any occupation which is customarily is so like non-defined that I think it's hard to put that in there, because then how do you prove it's customarily with, in whole and part conducted in a residence? That's such a weird word to have in a definition, and I know they're trying to, I might just strike it.
Sure.
I would concur with Commissioner Murray that
It's a tough one.
I mean,
It is customary in England, where I'm from. No, it's like, how do you know? Everyone's customs are different. Kind of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns? So I think we'll massage that definition to expand what an occupation is, and then
What are we trying to prevent? Is that what we're trying to prevent something? What are we trying to
Right.
prevent?
yeah. And I think that's
He's coming up with this, I think he's got a wood shop, because he
The
keeps
auto
coming up with
garage.
that example.
not for profit. And,
Auto repair?
Yeah,
It's
the
not
auto repair
obnoxious,
with 23 cars.
I mean, an auto repair is a pretty good example, because you can't, sometimes you can't necessarily complete the job. Or you're gonna say, all right, I'm waiting for parts, I'll push this car out onto the street.
Right.
And I'll bring the next car in that I know that I can fix, because the customer wants it like yesterday. And
Or
so now we have, what are basically disabled vehicles parked on the street, potentially during snowfall. They can't be moved, plows have to come by, so it just can spiral.
Well, you got noise,
Noise.
when car repair kind of place.
Commissioner Schwarting, chair, members of the commission, I think that once we get into the section on home occupation, that'll help frame it a little more as to what, what the intent would be.
okay. Do I want to jump to the accessory dwelling units section? So this is a new section that would be added to section 18, which defines some of the miscellaneous code provisions regarding pools, fences, accessory structures, to expand some design requirements and performance standards for what an actual ADU could be, because they can take many forms. But just for consistency, this section has been added that outlines some of those minimums. So this is draft language that kind of expands off of those two definitions of an attached ADU and a detached ADU. In its current form, a detached ADU would be required to get approval via conditional use permit. Currently, conditional use permits are required of all ADUs. Whereas in the zoning districts, which we'll get to, an attached ADU would be an accessory use. Something that we're seeing as staff is many of the new home models that are being proposed by Lennar and Pulte and all the builders have options for what could be perceived as an attached ADU, whether it's just a kind of basement suite that has a small kitchen in it with a bedroom or something, or a main level flat that, for all intents and purposes, you would not be able to tell that it's an ADU from the street side. So incorporating some of those design elements that would prevent it from kind of being have the outward appearance of a duplex, and making it slightly easier to get permitted as opposed to a conditional use permit for an attached ADU. Did have a question for the commission if that's something that was desirable, or if more stringent permitting requirements via conditional use permit for an attached ADU would be something that's desired, or you'd want for more consideration.
I'll just jump in on the topic. I think that if you have that from the outside appearance doesn't create any visual impairment, then I don't see that it benefits city to have to go and look to do a conditional use permit. I know they exist. One exists down the street from me because we have walkout lots. And for an in-law suite, they chose to finish the basement and basically have a one-bedroom apartment down in the walkout lower level. And so I think that that's a good promotion of housing use. I think that that's what you're trying to get to with having the ADU topic. Isaac, I know that you worked on this very hard. Don't take it personally, but I think that the first sentence is a good preamble for your presentation to city council, but to put it into the actual ordinance just is like almost expressing the city's opinion at the time that they wrote the ordinance, rather than just sticking to saying, this is what we allow, this is what we don't allow.
Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, fair enough. Yeah, it's up to the discretion of the commission on how you want to pose that.
I like the language. I think it's a good, it brings, it says that we've got good topics. And the topic is germane to what is going on at the time we're part of the commission. But in 15 years from now, somebody might say, well, that's controversial, and I don't like that language. I'm just trying to steer away from anything that could be viewed as controversial.
I would question the word encourage alternate housing types. We're not trying to encourage them, we're just trying to recognize them. So maybe, I don't want to be a wordsmith, but.
No, Chair, members of the commission, I think it should be the preamble, which is useful in most cases in the future for determining the intent of a code. Whatever that is, it should be, what you as a commission and what the city council believe it should be, because it does kind of establish the mood of the ordinance on how it's interpreted in the future. So whatever verbiage that you want to pursue or strike in that sense is what it should be, and is totally possible.
Certainly, the second sentence is very definitive, and that truly is what we want to do, is to accommodate the housing needs of residents. But yeah, I do agree with the first sentence. The city recognizes the need for alternative housing types based on current housing trends. What was your verbiage, Greg?
I was just moving to drop the whole first sentence, and that's part of Isaac's PowerPoint presentation when he puts this before City Council. Say, this is why we've added this unit, to address these needs at this time. But to codify it in ordinance, I think that the second sentence gets it done at the beginning, saying to accommodate housing needs of residents, et cetera, and
The city to accommodate the housing needs.
Yeah, we can strike it.
just trying to
It's all good.
push controversy away from you did a great job.
I tell Marty every day it's not our ordinance, it's the city's ordinance and its residents. It should reflect that.
So I'm almost going back to the actual definition of accessory dwelling unit. So like when I think of an accessory dwelling, it has its own entrance. Like when you're talking about its own kitchen, but it doesn't cite any of that here. So I think what we need to walk carefully between an expansion of a current home, like I'm doing an add-on, I'm gonna add a bedroom and a bathroom, and an accessory dwelling unit, because you can add on to your home if it fits within the parameters of your lot and the setbacks, and what makes it an ADU?
So
It doesn't really,
Commissioner Murray,
I don't know that it says.
Chair, members of the commission, I think what would make
That's
it
the tough part.
an ADU or an accessory dwelling is that whatever space is added would have to meet the code language for what a dwelling unit is. And that would be,
Okay.
it has living space, cooking, eating, and sanitary facilities, which is accepted by the state's building code.
So it's really the kitchen.
Well, would it be a kitchen?
So when I finished my
or-
basement, I built an accessory dwelling unit?
Potentially, yes.
I did then,
Yeah.
because I can do all those things.
Would we need to maybe take a step back and think about that in the definition of an accessory dwelling unit is that it creates a quote household? Because that's essentially what we're trying to get to, is that I see Commissioner Murray's point that I could de facto create an accessory dwelling unit with an addition to my home. But I think you go elsewhere, and I can't recall, but wasn't there something that talks about assigning an address number to the accessory dwelling unit so that it can be served by
Me.
emergency personnel, so that when you call in 911 and you say, hey, I just, I'm lying in my living room, I can barely reach my cell phone, and you are like, all right, which parcel and entrance am I gonna come into?
Has it ever stipulated under an ADU that you've seen the definition that it has a separate private entrance?
Commissioner Murray, Chair, members of the commission, no, there may be some instances where that is a requirement. I don't think it's very common that it would have a distinct separate entrance as a requirement on the inside, but
Lennar has a house plan that's getting pretty popular, and you've probably seen it, and it has that mother-in-law suite, and it does have 2 front doors. And I could just see just with their activity here that might be something that they would wish to build here.
yeah, and that's the same model that we've been getting demands for.
Yeah. And it's built at the same time as the primary dwelling, so it's not a secondary, it's built in conjunction. So is it secondary or is it, I don't know. It's very complicated.
Yeah, commissioners, I think and one of the reasons why staff is recommending that an attached accessory dwelling unit be a permitted accessory use is just for that reason, right? If you've, our definition of dwelling, which Isaac had explained what a dwelling includes. Now, if you have an accessory dwelling unit, you've essentially created 2 dwellings, either attached or detached. It's very common, especially now, to see a secondary dwelling unit either in a basement or, on an addition. And technically it's considered a dwelling unit, but if that is a permitted accessory use, then it's fine, right? Then you can go ahead and you can do that without needing to get a conditional use permit. And that's one of the reasons why we think that attached ADU should just be a permitted use. Now, when you're talking about adding a secondary structure, that becomes a little bit more potentially intensive or controversial perhaps with neighbors, so might require a further review process.
I agree with that.
So I would, tagging on to what Marty said, I think what this is attempting to do is kind of reduce the administrative nightmare of dealing with that for a land use case that we haven't seen too many complaints about, if any, for an attached ADU. So kind of addressing, kind of like home occupations, what people have that occurs without instance or negative effect. Yeah, and then I guess moving on, did note that a detached ADU would require a conditional use permit under this draft code language. In addition to that, a detached ADU would need to meet the minimum building setbacks required and outlined within the specific residential zoning district, which have been added for a later section. Also specifies that a detached ADU would be located on lots 10,000 square feet or greater, so ensuring there's not kind of 2 small structures or one house and a smaller structure on a smaller piece of property. Most properties within the R1 zoning district are at least 10,000 square feet. looking at what's existing, maybe some of the R2 properties, kind of by Meadows of Wasserman and in that area, that's where we'd see instances of smaller properties that are below that 10,000 square feet threshold where things are pretty close together. And then additionally addressing home ownership, specifying that the property owner who owns the property would have to be one of the people residing within within the primary residence or the ADU, just to ensure that it's not a case where folks are renting out a bunch of space and treating it as a townhome, but actually using it as something accessory to what they're living in. And then additionally, to prevent instances where an ADU could potentially be subdivided away from its primary residence, noting that an ADU wouldn't be subdivided from the house that it's associated with and making it its own standalone land use. Specifying that the house that the ADU is accessory to meets all the standards of the zoning district and is in a non-conformity, so making what could be a bad situation worse. Noting that both the ADU and the single-family house or principal use would comply with all code requirements. And then adding some provisions for the maximum size, minimum size, and proportionality of the ADU to a house. So this language specifies that an ADU could be up to 33% of the floor area of a home, up to 900 square feet with a minimum size of 200 square feet. In the instance of a detached ADU, if there is a situation where a greater square footage was needed or someone wanted to propose that, under the auspices of a conditional use permit review, commission and council could review that on an individual basis. But this provides just kind of a baseline for size. 900 square feet was chosen because that fleshes up with what we currently require for maximum sizes for detached garages in our residential zoning districts.
Can I make a suggestion to make this a little more clear or bring some clarity? It seems like there's detached, all attached pieces of the ordinance that are strewn about in this. Could we bracket this so that you start off with ADUs? These are the features that are pertinent to all ADUs. Every ADU has to have these requirements and meet this. And then from there, we descend into detached ADUs. And these are the things that we're restricting for detached ADUs, such as like conditional use, and then attached ADUs, so that if I'm doing an ADU, I want some clarity. Like, what do I have to know for an ADU? I'm not gonna do a detached ADU, so don't take me through a whole bunch of the ordinance to try to pick out, am I in the right spot or not, when all I'm doing is an attached ADU. So if we can make that simpler to follow the ordinance, and then from there, we can sort of now say, what are some of the things about detached that we want to have that maybe attached doesn't necessarily need to have, because it's some of the unique features we just talked about.
Certainly. Commissioner Urbanski, we can definitely clean it up.
Makes sense.
Yep. Keep it simple. I like it. And then additionally, noting that, reflecting what the city expects for design standards for all accessory structures or accessory uses, that it matches the style and appearance of the house that it's adjacent to, which can reflect siding, construction materials, many different things. noting that an ADU shall contain no more than 2 bedrooms, addressing that off-street parking shall be required for the ADU, so that would reflect one parking space per unit. Noting that no more than 1 ADU shall be permitted per parcel and only 1 address shall be provided, so ensuring that it's actually an accessory thing and not just a completely separate residence. And then 14 is a design element consideration, noting that an exterior door for an attached ADU is, if it's on the same wall as a primary residence, that the 2 doors shall be separated a minimum of 20 feet apart. It does have some motivation behind the building code, but also some cities incorporate that to avoid the front curbside appearance of being just a side-by-side duplex. So that up to the commission if that's a design element that you want to consider.
Can I bring us back up to this consistency with the existing structure? Might we be better served adjusting the language to be something along the lines of consistent with the surroundings that the ADU would be placed in? So, for instance, let's say my neighbor's house is really ugly and they want to put an ADU that's detached, but they like the style of my house and they'd want to blend that ADU into the, to that surrounding. Would we be maybe too limiting to say this detached ADU, I'm using detached in this case, but this ADU, as long as it were consistent and harmonious with the surroundings, maybe it fits better with topography, other structures, or somebody may want to go with a completely different look for this ADU, but the ordinance says it has to be of similar structure to the home that it's, and the parcel that it's sitting on.
Sure. Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission.
I'll put that idea out there generally to just throw it up for discussion though.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think as far as design standards go for city requirements, they're fairly nebulous and can be interpreted in many ways. Obviously, based on who's enforcing the code, that could come into consideration. Someone could say, you have stucco on your house, you need to have stucco on your ADU. I think in practice, what has occurred historically in the city is that there is, because the definition of what our design standards are is somewhat nebulous, and there's some wiggle room for what's right, and we're not looking at it with a subjective, I like this color and don't like that color. There's the room to blend different things that are different styles that could mesh well with each other that may not necessarily be the exact same thing. So I think having some reference to what's desired is good. This item could be stricken and it would simply defer to what the city's code requirements for design standards are currently, which kind of mimics what this language specifies. Again, I think in practice, probably the most often the conversation that we have with folks on this are people that are kind of putting up a shed that uses completely different materials from their house, but they still are able to blend it together, even if house is brown and shed is white, and make it look like it belongs in the same neighborhood. So there's wiggle room, but I think it's easy to get challenged on if the city is reviewing something and saying, I don't like the style of this. That no could be easily challenged just based on folks' freedom of expression and things to that end. I don't know if that answered your questions, but that's my stump speech.
Don't you think it's an exception where somebody's going to design something very different from their current home? Or the consistency to the current home to me makes sense.
Well, I mean, I think it makes sense, certainly when you're doing something attached, but if you're doing something detached, and the surroundings might dictate something that is not necessarily congruent with.
I can always ask for a variance.
Pardon?
They can ask for a variance, right? If they're gonna do something.
Yeah, I mean, that's a potential solution. I mean, I just think about, our variance that we did for the no fence for the pool, and how somebody might want to say, look, I want to do an accessory dwelling unit, but it's close to the shoreline, and I want it to look like the bluffs of the shore, as opposed to like what the rest of my house looks like. I just don't want our ordinance to create a conflict for that. But I mean, I guess you make an excellent point that you would now create a solution through a variance to code, but then that means these guys have more variances to deal with in terms of
Yeah,
conflict.
And we have that many ADU.
members of the commission, I think in kind of putting it into context, let's say it was a detached ADU, it would require a conditional use permit, so it wouldn't necessarily be staff administering what the right design standards are. It'd be a board of the applicant's peers, the commission, the city council, determining, are we way off base here with what's being proposed? Or are there conditions that can be associated with the conditional use permit to better fit what the specific design of that specific ADU is?
All right. Thank you, Isaac.
And then, it's, design standards are certainly funky though, because
Shouldn't
everyone
allow,
has.
shouldn't allow any ADUs, and then we can condense this part.
Also at the discretion of the commission. I guess moving on, can't remember where we're at. 15, noting that an ADU shall be constructed on a permanent foundation with no wheels. Haven't seen it here, but trying to avoid any ice houses or tiny homes.
Tiny homes, yeah.
And then additionally providing reference that for utility connections, it would be served by one utility connection rather than metering off of two, or in accordance with the city's code language on utilities. And then noting that an ADU would have to meet the requirements of state shoreland and watershed district requirements. So we will try to condense that and clean it up so it's a little bit more readable for the commission's consideration in the future. Then moving on to home occupations. So this is another added section, much like accessory dwelling units, that it attempts to provide some regulations and design standards for what an acceptable home occupation could be. As we've discussed in the past, this is really an attempt to diagnose the symptoms of what you don't want, rather than picking and choosing every single home occupation that could possibly exist. We'll carry over our discussion on the actual definition of home occupations and rework that within this section. But the section notes that an occupation must be clearly incidental and subordinate to the use of a dwelling as a residence. No outdoor display or storage of materials, goods, supplies, or equipment used in the home occupation shall be permitted on the premises. So no chainsaw carving in the front yard with wood chips everywhere. A maximum of one person other than the members of the immediate family residing in the dwelling shall be employed in the home occupation. That number could certainly change based on the commission's experience, on what you've observed in the community, but typically in many city codes, it's reduced to a smaller number of folks employed by the actual occupation.
Number 2, is the intent of number 2 to be no outdoor display or outdoor storage?
Correct.
It just kind of puts it together, so I might define that just a little clearer. And then I would say, just going back up with the customarily and customary, those words being really not defined, pull them.
Sure.
Sorry to go backwards,
I'm
but
sorry, I want to just expand on where you went with number 2. So outdoor display,
signage.
I mean, that could be, you're right, can, Julie's custom knitting, and she puts a big neon sign on the outside of her door, and then, the neighbors are like,
Get that off.
so is that what outdoor display means, or outdoor display means I'm, putting my Adirondack chairs out in the front lawn and say, like AdirondackMan.com?
Yeah, I think it could be either.
Signage. Is
I
it
think,
signage?
Chair, members of the commission, I think with respect to signage, although it's not addressed specifically for home occupation, the city does have a fairly intense sign code that refers to specific signs that are permitted within residential areas. So if the home occupation was in a residential zoning district, it would be required to meet the sign code, which does not permit most forms of signs within residential areas.
Certainly, number 3 is very definitive, and that may well eliminate number 2.
Certainly, yeah, it's definitely a belt and suspenders approach to looking at it. But we could strike number 2 in favor of number 3 if that is the pleasure of the commission.
Do we agree?
Kind of like the outdoor storage of materials being called out, just because they could say, oh, no, I use that chainsaw for personal use, not,
And to go back to display,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, if you're building lawn furniture and you put
20 of them.
20 chairs out in your front yard and as a display model, and is that considered a display, or you're just out in your front yard every night?
Probably.
That's, I mean,
I'm leaning with Commissioner Murray on this, that keeping number 2 in and having a clear objective standard of what is the intent of the ordinance to say, these things are not gonna sit outside, and then it's just, number 3 becomes the catch-all for things that number 2 doesn't clearly
Yeah.
define.
I like it, actually.
Yep.
Okay. I think we got a consensus there. Moving on to number 5, if there's no comments on the employment aspect, noting that off-street parking shall be provided on the premises, is to not introduce an influx of on-street parking in front of a home. The home occupation shall not generate a nuisance such as traffic, on-street parking, noise, vibration, glare, odors, fumes, electrical interference, or other hazards to any extent greater than what is usually expected in a residential neighborhood. Slightly nebulous at the end, but again, kind of a catch-all for the worst-case scenario of something that could happen. Noting that the use shall be permitted only within a dwelling occupied by the proprietor, so that the person that owns it shall not utilize more than 20% of the total floor area of the dwelling unit, with the exception of residential daycare, which may utilize the entire dwelling unit. And lastly, noting that the home occupation shall not require the use of a vehicle requiring a commercial license, which is a very common one that we hear about, is,
Work trucks.
Delivery vans.
someone driving a dump truck home, and parking it in the front yard or something.
Yeah.
Any comments on any of those items, or any items that should be expanded upon within the section?
So, I'm just throwing things out there, so if you had a lawn mowing business or lawn mowing, snow plowing business, and you had run it out of your house, but you had trucks coming back and forth, or that be allowed or not allowed?
Yeah. Commissioner Kuhn, Chair, members of the commission, I think it's regarding larger vehicles that would require a commercial license. Maybe we could spell that out, but in practice and enforcement, in most cases, that's when it's been applied for, a larger semi-truck or something to that end. That would gather more attention, and not so much for like a trailer with lawn mowers on the side of it that are parked intermittently.
That said, on number 7, though, if we could go back to that, please. How did we arrive at 20%? Is that something that's consistent with what other cities are doing?
Sure. Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, that was a draw from comparing to our market cities. And it's specific to ensuring that, a dwelling doesn't become solely a business. That's where it's rooted in. That number could be anything at the discretion of the commission with what you feel comfortable with. But could be 100 for all cases if, what's the distinction? In practice and enforcing it, it may be tricky to put a number on it. If, someone's only using an office, that makes sense. But if someone's doing something in all areas, then that could be true too. I'm not sure that it would be traditionally enforced like off the cuff unless there is a problem applying to a property, probably triggering the other code provisions that regulate home occupations.
Well, let's just go back to my little woodworking enterprise in my basement, which, like, on a day when Mrs. E decides that her washer and dryer don't need to live down there anymore, and I can take all 800 square feet of my basement and commit it to, a shop that doesn't, from the outside, doesn't look like any business is being carried on. I don't have any noxious fumes. I don't create any noise. And I want to manufacture a custom, piece of furniture on a commission. Maybe I don't do it full-time every day, but certainly part-time. I would be prohibited because that's greater than 20% of my overall dwelling. So, I want to be accommodating to, the spirit of this, and that's not to have an enterprise carried on that disrupts the character of the land use, but then also doesn't necessarily restrict people from, the freedom to pursue an occupation. Right. Commissioner Kuhn has another example. There are some people that carry on a hairdressing operation in, just a corner of their basement. That might be 20% of their house, or it might be 40%.
Yeah, Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, I think, and again, just talking through this and looking at this, I think potentially the intent of not wanting it to entirely become a business use and that it really needs to be secondary to the dwelling unit, I think that can be accomplished through these other code provisions. Right, the limited number of employees, the limited number of people that can be parked there, the nuisances that it's not supposed to create. So, as Isaac mentioned, perhaps percentage of use of footage area might not matter. And if that's something that the commission thinks isn't an issue, then we just take that out.
I would think for the most part that what happens within the confines of the 2x4s, that's pretty much your own business. And if you want to take a wall out, or whatever it may be, and again, you know, if it's woodworking, that's, you know, that's, I don't know exactly where our control, so to speak, comes in, as long as it's within the confines of the 2x4s.
Yeah, Chair, members of the commission, like Isaac mentioned, I think it'd be a difficult enforcement anyway to dictate that, so.
I think it's okay to take it out.
Since we're getting nitpicky, I don't like 8 at all.
It's fair.
I mean, I'm a school bus driver, or I own a school busing company. I live at home. I store all my buses off-site, but I do all my paperwork in the basement. Technically, I'm against code. What would be the other thing that you would have? Say I'm a long-haul trucker. I live on 2 acres, you know, southern part of town. I just park my cab in my driveway for Friday night when I get back, take off again on Sunday night. Technically, I'm running my business out of my house. Yeah, I'm parking my cab of my 18-wheeler puller. Is that the right term? The cab? Tractor. I'm not bringing the whole thing home. I'm just bringing the front end home. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 19 driving a dump truck for the city. I don't know if it was totally legal, but I didn't require a commercial license, so things might have changed a little.
Do you idle your tractor all winter long on that weekend?
I don't know. I'm just
So the
saying I
diesel
don't like
doesn't
8.
gel up?
So it's not really the use of a vehicle requiring the commercial license, it's the vehicle parked at the home. Is that the problem with that one? Is that why it's there?
Yeah, I would say it's
Yeah.
one part noise. Just speaking solely from the complaints that we receive, many times it's
I get
a
why it's
vehicle
there.
parked out there. So again, up to the discretion of the.
Well, is that really a home occupation? I'm a tractor trailer driver. That's just my job. That's not a home occupation. I don't do it at my house.
Yeah, you could get around it that way. Yeah, I mean, we're picking this thing apart left and right.
Yeah.
I'm just going, I don't like 8.
Yeah,
But
But I do know that there was a resident that was in Eden Prairie that was doing screen printing and embroidery out of her basement and had, 15 computerized sewing machines going, and the power company basically notified the city that said she must be doing something because her power usage is a lot more than the rest of the neighborhood, and the city shut her down, told her to get it out. Now, I don't know what their ordinance is or whatever either, but I mean, but she could have been doing it all on her own with, 15 machines going in her basement, wasn't creating any noise either.
But number 4 would protect us from that feasibly, right?
potentially, yeah. Commissioners, I think just going back to the large vehicle discussion, I think you're absolutely right that someone who works for a trucking company or is a owner operator of a truck, that's not necessarily a home occupation. The parking of that vehicle, my vehicle, is going to be governed under our oversized vehicle parking regulations, which requires a certain amount of time that things can be parked and where they can and can't be parked. So that doesn't necessarily fall under this code, I wouldn't think, or interpret. Where I do think there's potential and potential for complaints and issues is if you're running a landscaping company and you're bringing in and out loads of rocks, right, and dump trucks multiple times a day. I think that's the intent of what that's trying to say is you can't run a home occupation that requires that back and forth haul, delivery, drop off, pick up. So it certainly needs some massaging of language to better speak to that, I think, if we agree that that's a use we don't want to necessarily see in residential districts.
yeah, but I get the intent of it. I'm just saying I can run rocks in my 1 ton and have a huge trailer on, and I'm within the regulations because I don't require a commercial license to drive a 1 ton. If I go any bigger, I have to, but I think, so I think I could run a landscaping business with, moderately, a moderately big dually pickup truck, as easily as something where I would require a commercial license and be just as noxious.
Well, I think the principle of the regulations is, in general terms, respect of your neighbors, respect of the community, and let's define, if you don't know what genuine respect is, we will do that for you. And if it applies to anyone, then there you are. And I think that, unfortunately, if we were to say, well, just leave it up to common sense, that may not necessarily work. So we have to define, as you've done, Isaac, the regulations, and that just defines for those that wouldn't figure it out on their own, would be my view.
Yeah, again, I'm just being nitpicky. I don't like commercial license. That's all.
No,
You have your trailer and your lawnmowers and stuff, doesn't that
Well,
hit
it's
on number
number
2? Can't have the outdoor
Well, it's
equipment used?
visible evidence for sure. So it kind of gets covered by number 3.
I'll park around back.
Especially, I mean, if it's signed, it's a display. I think there's a lot in here to protect us.
Yeah,
That point is-
commissioners, I think, again, that speaks to outdoor storage. We have an example of a contractor who lives in town here, who uses his home as a home occupation, but for the most part, materials are not stored outside, they're inside and not visible, which has not been an issue, right? And I think so that there's an ability to allow those types of things, just not necessarily, you don't want, stockpiles of materials outside or a bunch of vehicles and such, so. I think, and Commissioner Pedersen, no, feel free to be as nitpicky as you like. This is the time, we'd rather do this now than when we have an ordinance and then we have the same questions.
Yeah, we might come around that, I get outvoted 6-1, but I don't like commercial license.
Well, and there's a lot of logic for that, at the same time. I don't know genuinely kind of what that really does control.
Right, what do you consider with a commercial license? Technically, a 1-ton dump truck and a trailer is licensed as a CT license plate, which is a commercial trailer or commercial vehicle. Which then would say that a landscaper pulling an enclosed trailer couldn't park it on, but then you're parking it on the street, moving it every day. I just know in our neighborhood, we had issues with a few neighbors that ran businesses and had their enclosed trailers parked on their driveways, and different neighbors were having a fit because they were parked there all weekend long. But our ordinance said it had to be moved within 48 hours, and you park it there Friday night, and Monday morning it was gone, But, and he was a commercial, he was a handyman that ran a business out of his house. So in that sense, his trailer had a display on it, but it was parked in his driveway, but it was there for, overnight or on the weekends.
Let's vote up commercial driver's license up or down.
So, I mean, you still got outdoor display,
Violations.
Well, I think we can have maybe Isaac and Marty take it back to work on it to get the spirit of what is here defined so that we really target what we're trying to do. I
Yeah.
think that, number 8 could be interpreted that if I needed a commercial license to operate a vehicle, I could not have this business being run out of my home. But in theory, you could be parking that vehicle on a different property outside the city, but the business itself would be not permitted within the city limits because that vehicle, which lives in a different place, requires a commercial license. So we have some technicalities about this that would render a business impermissible, yet what we're trying to say is we don't want to have these vehicles stacked up and filling people's driveways with the commercial vehicle itself.
It's a commercial driver's license, right? Not just a commercial vehicle license.
Yeah, Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, I think we need to just rethink that whole
Yeah.
section.
I mean, you could be a bush pilot that has a float plane that you keep on a lake outside of the city of Victoria. You need a commercial license to fly the plane, yet, Marty's Walleye Flying's LLC that he's running in his basement
Like that.
is, it would technically be a home occupation that would not be permitted, so.
Well, I
Commissioner
mean,
Ravansky, you get my point exactly. Thank you.
not to
I can
throw.
store my boat in my driveway.
Not to throw in one more thing on this whole issue, but I have a CDL. I've had a CDL since I was 18, well, since I was 20 years old, and I would drive during the summer, an 18-wheeler, primarily intrastate, and still have a CDL license. So, I mean, there's probably a lot of people. And I think the intent, I think what Kristen said was, what's the intent on this? What's truly, what do we really want to accomplish with this?
Well, it's to keep noxious vehicles out of the neighborhood,
Yep.
obviously. I just don't like how that's worded, to keep noxious vehicles out of the neighborhoods.
You're right.
I think we have a consensus with some direction on where to go, so we can smooth it out and massage it for future debate. Hopefully.
Throw in cars with bad mufflers.
If we could bring number 7 back.
Or
I am in
you
agreement on number
intentionally have a
7
loud muffler.
with that the home occupation permitted in a dwelling by the proprietor is worthy of mention, that we should say that these home occupations, you have to live there to have that business. You don't want to have your brother-in-law using your garage to run a business for himself of, say, cutting marble and making countertops in your garage and trafficking all that back and forth. And that would be, it's somebody else's business that's being carried on in your home. That business really needs to be carried on by you in your home.
Agreed.
So
Just
I think
That's
number
the
7
intent.
gets at that and prohibits it. I think we just had a problem with, at least I did, with, the size of the square footage of being too restrictive.
Chair, members of the commission, just so we can get some head nods of concurrence, it sounds like we want to strike the square footage or percentage requirement from there, so.
I think we reduce it. I
Agreed.
don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
Or make it, I think you have to have something, but whether it's even 50% or, if it's 100%, then they could use the dwelling and not even live there.
Less than 50, 30, 40?
50% would give you basically the use of your whole basement.
Or maybe you target it to the size of the 900 square feet that you're consistent with an accessory
Yeah.
detached dwelling unit.
Chair, members of the commission, we can kind of bird dog some language or parallel language that may get to the point of that without specifying a specific number per se, but we'll come back to you with some options.
Yeah, and Commissioner Kuhn, to your note, I think number one potentially addresses the fact of not making it become entirely commercial, is that it must be clearly incidental and subordinate to the use of the dwelling as a residence. So perhaps that speaks to that without necessarily having to set limits. But as Isaac said, we'll take it back to the workshop and play around with it some more.
Agreed.
Chair, commissioners, I know we're knocking on 8 o'clock. I'm gonna be taking the next section, but I don't feel like I can follow Isaac. He just did such a good job, so I would open it up. We've got quite a bit to go over when we actually break into the zoning districts. If you would like to table that discussion to the next meeting, as of right now, just the residential zoning district discussion is all we'd have on the agenda, so we'd be able to spend the entire meeting talking about the next section of this. So
Do we need to make a motion to table it?
yes, if you'd like to, you can make a motion to table it.
I second that motion.
Well, I think somebody needs to make the motion
I
first.
think it carried. I think it carried. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies. We'll close this item. Moving on to the miscellaneous.
We do feel comfortable that we've made the motion.
Yes.
Commissioner Vansky, if you feel comfortable that you've made the motion.
I don't know if I asked
You
if
need
we
to
should
make
make a
It
motion.
was just a discussion. I don't know the motion was
Yeah, let's
required.
make the motion and second it, I think.
All
Do I
right,
have a motion?
I'll make a motion to table the remainder of the discussion, starting with section 5 and going forward.
Do I have a
I'll
second?
second that motion.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you, Commissioner
Very good. Thank you.
Iverson.
Thank you. Moving on to the miscellaneous section of our agenda. I've submitted my application to re-up for another 3-year term. And all of us are at the pleasure of the city council, so the city council either approves or disapproves at the same time. That's coming up next Wednesday, or next Monday, rather, next Monday. So if the city council approves, I would run for the chair again. And that's also based on the approval of everyone at the same time, too. So, step 1, step 2. But we did have our, and I think Greg probably talked about it at the last meeting, we had our semi-annual review with the city council. And I think we got rave reviews. I think that we have accomplished a huge amount. I think we've worked extremely well, and I think we have accomplished, quite frankly, what we're supposed to accomplish. And of course, Marty got accolades again for keeping us all in line. So. The city council seemed to have agreed that we're producing and performing at the same time too. So the one other thing is a report on the previous city council meeting.
I don't know who's supposed to do it.
I don't either.
I don't recall either. Who was supposed to be there?
Nor do I.
Was it more maybe? No, she did the one, she did one prior to that.
I'll do the next one.
I did watch it.
Unless you're not selected.
Unless, well, and if I'm not selected, I'll still do it.
Okay.
but you'll never know what the, so we will,
I did watch it.
You reported, didn't you? No. You watched it online?
It was,
I
it
watched
was last night, was the most
It
recent.
was last night. They approved Marsh Hollow that we sketched, or the final plat. A lot of it was on consent agenda. They pulled off. They are having, one of the things that they pulled from the consent agenda to talk about was Bolton and Mink. The city is contracted with Bolton and Mink to review the roundabout over by the new planned development with the coffee shop in Ridgeview. But the city's paying like 10% or $5,000 of a $50,000 study that hopefully will give us answers on what the DOT or what will be allowed and
Feasibility, impacts,
feasibility and
yep.
is really what it's all is. It wasn't a go ahead that, you know, if they came back and said, yeah, roundabout's there, and, you know, it still isn't a go ahead for the development or anything like that. Then Alyssa did
Strategic plan review
review,
and senior advisory committee overview.
overview. So it was very low-key meeting.
So the developer's gonna spend 50 grand for the study on the roundabout?
It was a little bit less than that, Chair, members of the commission. It was, but not much. It was like a $47,000 study, and the city's gonna pay just under 5,000.
They have the risk of the city approving, and they have the risk of the DOT approving.
Yeah, it is a development-driven study because it's a study that the city likely wouldn't have done or wouldn't have done had.
I understand, but just from a developer standpoint, that seems like a lot.
Yeah, and there, it's answers I think that the city council has deemed that they need to have to make a determination as to whether or not they support or don't support a roundabout in that location. So that's what's trying to be found out with that study, so.
And whether rezoning it from residential to commercial, you know, with a traffic
Yep.
study or, you know. So,
that'll take some time.
they're hoping by, I don't know, somewhere I saw they wanted, the developer would like to have an answer by April 1st, but I don't know if that's gonna happen.
Yeah, I would,
Yeah, Chair, members of the commission, I think the hope is that the study's completed by April 1st, and I don't know that there will there wouldn't necessarily be a yes or no approval on the development because it needs to go through the process, but I think the intention would be, hopefully people are either have a comfort level or don't have a comfort level related to the roundabout, and that will be kind of a decision-making point at that point in time as to how the developer may or may not want to move forward with any submittals, so.
I've been in at a whole bunch of social events, within Victoria in the last month. And, awful lot of people that are aware of it. And I've heard a lot of comments, but, almost a surprising number of people that are aware of it. And, typically you don't get too much enthusiasm, too much knowledge on some of this stuff that's going on. So I would guess that would potentially bode well for the developer. We'll certainly find out, but.
Or they're aware of it because it impacts Highway 5, which is our corridor, traffic corridor.
Yeah.
Being aware of it, I think maybe it just.
But it was primarily the bank, and I don't, do we need another bank? Well, apparently, and the coffee shop. The coffee shop was a biggie. you know, that may be obvious, but it was,
Here's your bank.
yeah,
I will just caution once again, I want to make sure we don't get too close to open meeting territory.
Yep.
Here, talking about a potential project coming forward, so.
superb. Marty, do you have anything else?
Just a couple of quick notes from me. So you brought up the Planning Commission applications. We do currently have 5 applications, and we are looking for 3 regular members and 2 alternates. So hopefully that that math works out. We'll see what happens as we get through the interview process. And then to Chair Iverson's note, the new terms would begin first meeting in April. So our annual organizational meeting where chair would be elected, vice chair would be elected, will happen the first meeting in April of this year. And then secondly, just a follow up from the miscellaneous section from our last meeting, Commissioner Schwarting had posed the question about what the city's sodding requirements were with development. So I did get a little bit of more additional information on that. So currently, neither within the development standards or the construction standards or the development agreement, we don't have permanent stabilization or restoration requirements. So that's typically done between the builder and the prospective home buyer as to what they want, how they want to finalize their lot as far as seeding or sodding. The city does require a temporary seed mix that goes in over all of those lots until such time that homes are built, and then a homeowner and a builder decide what they want to do. That typically gets beat up pretty bad with construction, with vehicles and things. So, you know, it's really meant more to try and keep some stabilization as much as possible. And then the other note that our engineering department mentioned is that we do currently, within our development standards, dictate seeding and sodding for our city-owned outlots and property. We call out for sod adjacent to city-owned property. And then we also are currently doing a high-maintenance turf seed within outlots, which are outside of the right-of-way. That high-maintenance turf seed is being updated because of many of the things, Commissioner Schwarting, that you mentioned. They want something that's more robust, less maintenance, drought-resistant, and looks more like grass than their current specs. So the city is adjusting its seed mix in its outlot areas because of some of the watering issues that we dealt with last year. But we do not have a requirement when it comes to.
So we have to approach builders then, developers, in terms of what they would like to do.
Right. So just a follow up on that question that was posed last week. And that's all, Chair.
Very good, thank you. Commissioners, any other thoughts, concerns, issues? Hearing none, I would call for an adjournment. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Superb. Do I have a second?
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you.